Good
Good
morning.
morning, everyone. How's it going? Welcome to our weekly patient advocacy chat. Today we've got a super exciting topic, advanced directives. I'm Dr. Andrea, a pharmacist with 30 years experience that's now full-time in patient advocacy. With me, I have my co-host, Dr. Kevin Walker, the president of RPH Ally. He's on the West Coast. I'm on the East Coast. I'm proudly representing my dad's alma mater. There's been a side conversation about Pittsburgh and Duquesne. And so I'm wearing his colors this morning. Kevin, I think you're going to bring us in.
Good.
I love it.
Why is everybody watching today, Andrea? What's the big deal about these advanced directives you're talking about?
The big deal about advanced directives is, when people ask me what are they, and I'm like, okay, so let's just break down the term, right? It's making decisions to convey information before advanced you have the need. That's all they really are. However, I think that they oftentimes get wrapped into some kind of big, complex, I have to hire an attorney, I have to make this more challenging than it is. And they can be connected to some challenging conversations or some emotionally charged conversations, depending on, your family, or let's be real, not everybody has family to have this conversation with. And so then who becomes your trusted circle to be able to help you with that? And so that's why we're talking about this today. And I believe you have something that you're going to pull up that kind of goes into this, because we try to keep these conversations tight. Let's be real. I mean, this can be pretty complex. And I recently had a client that is in New York. So this is where I have this document pulled up from New York. And she's preparing to go into, let's call it a routine procedure. And yet she had some concerns, like, what if something was to go sideways, right? How would my family know what I want done? What is the process? What kind of paperwork can I have? And so I offer an Ask an Advocate a question session that's 30 minutes. And it's more for the DIY approach to, like in this situation, she needed to understand it, and could she find resources to be able to address her questions? And so in New York, you can see the URL at the top there. I think it's the Department of Health. I was able to pull up this booklet. Now I can tell you it is pretty dry language, because it is written more medically-ish. But you can see here in New York, they considered there to be 3 advanced directives: the healthcare proxy form, a living will, and a do not resuscitate order. And so this booklet goes through and explains what those different documents are, what they mean, why would one be relevant over another. It also gives you some situations to think about. I think on page 9, we have that if you pull up. And again, like I said, this particular document is a little medical-ish. And so when I'm talking to someone, we kind of walk through it a little bit more casually. Because as you can see here, would you want your doctor to withhold or withdraw medical treatment if that medical treatment will only prolong dying? I mean, that sounds a little bit like the 2x4 across the head, not a great conversation starter. So I think that there's ways that we can have these conversations without making them seem so, and yet, I mean, that's the reality of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, there is some grimness about the conversation, I think, overall, but the light and how you paint that, Andrea, I mean, I can recall being in the hospital long-term care center and having the nursing staff scrambling to find pulse forms, to try to find anything to do with their do not resuscitate stuff, and not having anything really put them into this is what we go with hospital protocol, is our next kind of step, because we have nothing to guide us. And for the family, huge stressor, who has the POA, who has these things? Oh, we don't have that. Oh no, who's going to take on these responsibilities and decide for mom and dad what we're going to think they would have wanted to do in those types of situations. So it takes so much stress off of family and the medical team to just have everything laid out and done between yourself and somebody like you, Andrea, a patient advocate that knows what they're talking about, to make it easier on the family and the medical team to value the wishes of the individual that is in a situation they can't communicate on.
Exactly. I mean, these can be emotionally complex. They can be triggering. They can be emotionally charged, even in the best of circumstances.
Right.
To have these conversations, because everybody in the discussion is bringing in their own, life experiences. They're filtering the conversation through what they've seen and witnessed. And you and I, we both come from that world of long-term care and hospice. And so I have very specific, very clear, understanding of, for me, it's almost like black and white, that if I'm not going to be kind of who I am, then, I'm good. I've kind of made peace with that. And yet there can be some really interesting nuances. And I can remember with my father, when he went into assisted living, with, cognitive impairment. He could remember the Steeler game. He could talk about, what happened that morning. So his memory was not inherently bad or poor. He just couldn't problem solve. And because of the place that he lived, his independent living situation, it just wasn't beneficial for his health. And yet, let's be real, all in all, he was still, incredibly autonomous, even in assisted living. So when it came down to us having to talk about this conversation, and he was there, and we're talking about, DNR, I said, I'm just curious, like if he's eating dinner and he chokes,
yeah,
does someone do the Heimlich?
Uh-huh.
And it was like everybody in the room kind of just paused, because I don't know if anybody had ever asked that.
Yeah.
And so, because I'm thinking, like if you were at a restaurant and somebody started choking next to you, I think if somebody knows the Heimlich, many of those people jump up, especially if they've had some kind of training, are you choking? Are you doing the universal sign? I've been trained. Do you mind? I mean, that's just kind of what people do, right? And yet in that moment at the assisted living, I'm trying to, I asked, and, there was like this moment of silence and a pause and kind of the aides, they would probably jump up and do it. And yet, if he's DNR, and then they just kind of stopped. And I'm looking at my sister and I'm like, so what do we do? And so in that moment, we did not take the DNR, because we were still struggling with that, because it was like, well, I mean, I want them to do the Heimlich, And
Yes.
so we didn't have clear guidance even from the facility in that moment, right? And so it appears pretty cut and dry in terms of the paperwork. And that's why I said, like, this booklet is great. There's others out there. I have found, when I work with a client like this one in New York, I actually got a text from her. She just went to her pre-surgery appointment, and she's like, I walked in with my binder and they were so impressed, and like, nobody comes this prepared, because we talked about prehab, rehab, everything that goes in. And she walked in with all her paperwork. And, and so we have this conversation about, how do you talk with your loved ones? Understand what your comfort level is, what their comfort level is, who is comfortable making these decisions. Do you have a fleet of family that are going to bring very different perspectives and energy to this? And then how do you honor what you want, right? And work through that. And then the technical filling out the paperwork, that's kind of the after piece of these larger conversations. And it doesn't have to all be one conversation. It's not like, okay, everybody sit around the table. Today, we're going to talk about advanced directives and how I die. It does not have to be that heavy. I mean, I think, dare I say, that these are conversations that should be had over, we should be having ongoing and over time, because situations change. We're in different places depending on our health. And so I think it's a more ongoing discussion that's just woven into part of life.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing, Andrea, that I always think is missed. It's woven as part of life. And going through these number of forms, speaking of woven as part of life.
Yay, he's awake. Good morning.
Making in this morning. But the woven piece is really this for me. it feels like an overwhelming number of forms, right? It seems like a lot to be able to take care of. And oftentimes that's why it's put off, because we don't want to do it. But
Yes.
for you, I guess advice on both the patient side and on the advocate side, what is an easy way? You mentioned a 30-minute meeting, just like an initial consultation, which I'm sure, that doesn't include like filling out the forms, but could introduce them. But tell me more about how do you get from I've got no documentation to I'm prepared and ready with at least these advanced directives ready to go.
Right. Well, I actually created for my clients like a roadmap, a journey where you get to share kind of your story about, envisioning your life, right? And how you live. And within that, how do you want to die? Because there is a beginning and end to this story, whether we like it or not. And do we want to own that? Or do we want to find ourselves kind of at the mercy of the machine or the circumstances in the chaos? Because it's going to happen, right? And so the way that I work through it, if somebody has, the comfort of the pure DIY, like I did with this recent client, I provide a resource list and tools and links and all of that. So they just aren't, 10 hours Googling, right? And so they have those tools. But what I do is I help walk them through that, in a perfect world, what would it look like? How do you control that? And there's prompts to even talk about with family. So the family gets to share that, of what it looks like, because we know it's going to impact the people behind us. And so, yeah, then we just decide on, we come to an agreement on what works best for them, because really that's what, as an advocate, that's what it's really about. Yes, I have 30 years in healthcare. Yes, I've seen some horrific things. I've seen some amazing things. It is not my role to tell you how to make this all work. It's to listen to what you want, what your goals are, your values, give you that support, that, that battle buddy, that would have that collaboration, however you want to feel, guide, mentor, to take, to make sure that you have the experience that you want. And one aspect of that is this paperwork.
Well, that's excellent, Andrea. And one thing, hopefully in a future episode, we can just start going through some of these little details to be able to just introduce people to here's what they are, here's how to feel comfortable. This is a good overview of kind of what they are and how they work. But in future episodes, we'll peek into those a little bit. Any closing notes for the crew?
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because next week, and I do have to go back and check our drive sheet because I might have my conversations out of order, but we're going to talk, you mentioned it, I think, the portable medical orders. And that's something that people don't think of. And I was trying to think of a connection between travel. The last 2 weeks, we were talking about travel health. And I think that, for people that are active, that are out there, particularly if they are living with underlying complex medical conditions, having paperwork that they can take with them to convey these wishes is an added form of security. And I think that's what we're going to talk about next week. They have different acronyms, but portable medical orders, that's what we'll talk about. And then, yes, we'll be breaking down each of these, the relevance, kind of the if this, then that.
That's so exciting, Andrew, because I really think unfortunately, I do think preparing for what you never prepare for is a great thing that advocates do. And this is one of those things that just ends up going on the back burner till it's too late, just like a will and testament or anything else that's kind of going on with financial documentation. And so having this in place and making sure you're thinking about it early, great from a patient perspective to think I should find an advocate to help me with this, because it can be cumbersome. And on the opposite side, if you're looking to be a patient advocate, what a great starter point. What an easy thing to say, this is difficult, this is painful, this is easy for something for you to be able to offer as a service, to be able to help people through and use your background, pharmacist, healthcare provider, whatever it might be, that's taking some training from Andrea to help do this as a business model. What a easy spot. Someone comes to the counter and they say, I want my medications today. And you can offer them, hey, do you have all of your advanced directives already set up and ready to go? We have a service to get that done for you. Easy interest for us to be able to help our patients in a whole nother way. So always appreciate it. Andrea, you want to sign us off?
Oh yeah. Well, thank you everyone for joining. I do go back and look for any comments. So after you watch this, if you have comments, feel free to write questions, comments down below. If you're watching it on replay, please add hashtag replay. It helps me understand like who's showing up live and you know who comes back to it. If you have, and you can also reach out to me directly, Wayfinder Advantage. You can see it right there. I'll put my my information in the comments below.
Perfect. Well, that sounds good. Everybody have a wonderful day.
Take care.